What would drive a man to bury himself alive in the wilderness, far from every human voice, every trace of love? Jed Holt knew the answer, though he never spoke it aloud. He had built his life around silence, around walls thicker than his cabin logs, around the vow that he would never again risk his heart. But fate has a cruel way of testing the vows men make in grief. The wind howled through the Montana mountains like a wounded beast, shaking the thick log walls of Jed's cabin. He had lived here alone for 15 winters. The firelight flickered across his face, tracing lines carved deep by sorrow. At 39, he looked far older. Dark hair streaked with gray hung past his shoulders, and his beard grew wild and unkempt. Once, long ago, he had cared about appearances. That ended the night he buried his wife Mary and their unborn child under frozen Kansas soil. Jed's cabin was small, no more than 20 feet square, built with his own hands from pine logs dragged down the slope. The floor was bare, the furniture plain, and every piece told of survival, not comfort. A ladder led to the sleeping loft where a straw mattress lay covered with furs. Shelves lined with dried meat and herbs stood against the wall. His rifles rested on pegs above the door, always close, always ready. Beyond the glass-paned window, a rare luxury he'd hauled from Billings at great cost, the storm raged. Snow fell heavy, the kind of storm that killed careless men who wandered too far from shelter. Jed stirred the venison stew in his pot, Thunder's restless nickers echoing from the lean-to stable outside. Thunder, his black stallion, was the only soul he trusted. The horse never demanded more than hay and shelter, never questioned his scars or silence. He picked up his carving knife and worked on another wolf figurine. Always wolves, silent, watchful, carved companions to fill the empty hours. Wolves understood survival. They howled to the moon, but the moon never howled back. But something gnawed at him that night. The storm's howl carried a strange edge, a warning tone he had learned to respect. Jed pulled on his heavy buffalo coat and stepped outside to check on Thunder. Snow stung his face, the wind near knocking him sideways. He calmed the horse, gave fresh hay, and then stopped. Beneath the storm's roar, he heard something else, a sound that didn't belong. It was faint, almost lost in the wind. Not the cry of an animal, but something human. Jed froze, instincts sharp. For a long moment, he considered ignoring it. Men had died out here because they meddled in what wasn't theirs to fix. He owed nothing to anyone. But against his own better judgment, he strapped on snowshoes, slung his rifle, and followed the sound down the slope. It didn't take long to find the wreck. The stagecoach lay on its side like a child's broken toy, half buried in a drift. The driver was slumped over, long dead, his frozen hands still clutching the reins of horses stiff with ice. The strong box had burst open, scattering mail and parcels across the snow. A child's toy horse, a bonnet, books torn from their bindings. Death lingered in every shadow. Jed's jaw tightened. Storms like this didn't forgive mistakes. The passengers were scattered like broken dolls, lifeless in the snow. He almost turned back. Then he heard it again, weak, fragile. A thread of life where there should have been none. Pushing through the drift, he found her. A young woman lay curled beneath a boulder, half buried in snow. Her cloak was torn, her gloves soaked through, her chestnut hair tangled across her pale face. A Boston lady, by the look of her fine wool dress with lace at the collar. A woman who had no business on a Montana stage road in December. Jed knelt, pressing 2 fingers to her throat. At first, nothing. Then, a faint flutter, a heartbeat fighting for life. He should have walked away. He told himself that, even as his arms scooped her up. Even as he carried her toward Thunder waiting on the slope. Her body was light, frighteningly so, and her breath came shallow against his chest. Every step back up the mountain became a battle against time and storm. By the time he reached the cabin, his muscles ached, his lungs burned, but he didn't stop. He shoved the door closed behind them, laid her near the fire, and stripped away her frozen clothes with rough, trembling hands. He told himself it was necessity, nothing more. Wet fabric would kill her faster than any wound. Still, his chest tightened as her pale skin shivered in the firelight. He wrapped her in his buffalo robe, hung her garments near the flames, and stoked the fire until the cabin glowed with heat. For hours, she lay still. Jed sat in his chair, knife forgotten, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Each breath felt like a victory he had no right to claim. By sunset, her lashes fluttered. Her eyes opened. Green. So green they startled him. She looked around, then at him. Confusion turned to terror. She screamed. The sound shattered the cabin's silence like a gunshot. She scrambled back, clutching the robe to her throat, her eyes wild. "You're safe," Jed rasped, his voice rusty from disuse. "The storm." The coach crashed. "Everyone else is gone." Her gaze darted to her clothes drying by the fire, to her bare arms beneath the robe, and horror filled her face. "You were freezing." He said carefully, "I did what was needed, nothing more." Her breath came ragged, disbelief written across her face. Then the truth of his words. The storm, the wreck, the bodies, seemed to break her. She sank to the floor and began to sob. Not soft ladylike tears, but raw, shaking grief. Jed stood frozen, memories of another night, another loss, clawing at him. He had howled alone once. At least she did not have to. When the sobs faded, she lifted her head. "Charlotte," she whispered, "Charlotte Whitmore." Of Boston, Jed nodded, once Jed Holt. Her chin trembled, but her voice steadied. "How long?" "Until we reach town." Jed glanced at the window, where snow fell heavy, still, storms not done. "Could be days, could be a week." Her lips parted, disbelief flickering across her face. Then she drew the robe tighter, a lady's dignity clinging to her even here. "Then we will endure it." Jed turned away, but inside he knew the truth. He had broken his vow the moment he carried her into this cabin, and whatever came next, his life would never again be the same. The storm did not let up. For 2 more days the cabin remained buried in snow, its walls groaning under the weight of wind and ice. Jed and Charlotte circled each other like strangers forced into uneasy truce. She moved stiffly, always wrapped in his robe or in his patched flannel shirt and trousers that hung loose on her frame. She carried herself with a grace that even hardship couldn't strip away, but her green eyes watched him with a mix of caution and defiance. On the 3rd morning she demanded clothes. "I won't sit wrapped in a dead man's coat forever," she said, chin high. Jed had to bite back a sharp retort. It wasn't a dead man's coat. It was Mary's, his Mary's. The thought of Charlotte wrapped in it scraped at wounds that had never healed. Still, he went to the trunk and brought out his spare shirt and wool trousers. "Too big," he muttered, setting them down. "I'll make do," she said, turning her back to him as she changed. When she emerged, the clothes swamped her, cuffs rolled, sleeves dangling. Yet somehow she looked less fragile, more real. "You'll freeze without layers," he said. "Then teach me how not to," she shot back. So he did. Jed showed her how to split kindling, how to tend the fire, how to haul water from the spring without spilling it in the snow. Her hands blistered and her cheeks reddened, but she did not complain. Each small task seemed to steel her, to strip away some of the city softness. That night, over stew thinned with the last of the venison, Charlotte asked about the wooden wolves on the mantel. She picked one up, tracing the sharp lines with delicate fingers. "You made these," she said softly. Jed shrugged. "Passes the time. They're beautiful. Alive, almost. They're just wolves." "No," she said, her gaze steady. "They're you. Strong, alone, always looking out at something they can't have." Her words cut close, too close. Jed busied himself with the fire, pretending not to hear. But the truth of it burned in his chest. The next day, Charlotte insisted on learning more. She followed him to check his traps, stumbling in snowshoes but refusing to quit. When they found a rabbit caught, she paled but didn't turn away. "Quick and clean," Jed said, snapping the animal's neck. Her eyes filled, but she nodded. "Teach me." By evening, she had set her first snare with determined hands. Later, as they sat by the fire, Charlotte tried carving. Her first attempt looked more like a lump than a creature, but she laughed at herself, the sound soft and startling in the cabin's stillness. Jed found himself watching her more than the fire, drawn to the way the light caught in her hair, to the stubborn lift of her chin when she refused to give up. When the knife slipped and nicked her thumb, instinct moved him before thought. He caught her hand, cleaning the wound with whiskey, wrapping it gently. Her skin was warm against his rough palms, her breath shallow as she watched him tie the cloth. For a moment, neither moved. Jed released her hand as if burned, retreating to his chair. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but heavy with something unspoken. That night, Jed lay awake on the floor while Charlotte slept in the loft. Every sigh, every rustle of straw above pierced him like an arrow. He had sworn never to let another person into his heart. Yet here she was, her presence turning his fortress into something perilously close to a home. On the 5th day, the storm finally broke. Pale sun lit the mountains, turning the snow to blinding white. Jed saddled Thunder, preparing to ride down and check the road. Charlotte stood at the door, bundled in his coat. "I'm coming with you." "No," he said firmly. "It's dangerous." "I've survived worse," she replied, eyes steady. Jed studied her. The woman who had collapsed half dead in the snow was gone. This Charlotte was steel, wrapped in silk. Against his own judgment, he nodded. "Stay close." They rode out together, the world silent except for Thunder's labored steps. Down in the valley, the stage road lay buried, but not empty. 3 riders approached, their figures stark against the snow. The lead man carried himself with a polished arrogance that made Jed's gut tighten. The others rode like hired guns. Jed's voice was low and sharp. "Get back inside, Charlotte." She stiffened. "Number, who are they?" Jed's grip tightened on his rifle. Trouble Charlotte's gaze fixed on the lead rider. Her face went pale, and her breath caught. "Oh, God," she whispered. "That's Richard Peyton, my fiancé." Quote, Richard Peyton dismounted with the air of a man who owned the ground beneath his boots. His coat was fine wool, tailored sharp, a strange sight against the wild Montana snow. Behind him, the 2 hired guns rested their hands near their holsters, eyes scanning the cabin like predators sizing up prey. "Jed Holt, I presume," Richard said smoothly. His voice carried the kind of confidence that came from money and power. "You've something of mine." "I've come to take her back." Jed's jaw tightened. "She isn't yours." "She is my fiancée," Richard said, glancing toward Charlotte. "A contract signed, sealed, and witnessed. Her family owes me debts, and she owes me her presence." "You've meddled in business far above your station." Charlotte stepped forward, chin high, though her face had lost all color. "I am not property, Richard. Not yours. Not anyone's." Richard's polite mask cracked. His blue eyes turned sharp. "You've gone mad. Look at you. Dressed like a pauper, living in a shack. Do you think this hermit can give you the life you deserve?" Charlotte's hand brushed Jed's sleeve, steady but firm. "He's given me more life in 1 week than you ever would in a lifetime." The words stung Richard like a lash. He motioned to his men. "Take her." The moment hands twitched toward pistols, Jed moved. His rifle came up fast, the sound of the shot cracking through the valley. One gunman spun and fell, clutching a bleeding shoulder. The other dove behind his horse, returning fire. Snow exploded near Jed's boots. Charlotte, heart-pounding, grabbed the second rifle from the cabin wall. Jed had taught her enough. She aimed, breath sharp, and fired. Richard screamed, his pistol clattering into the snow, his hand grazed by her bullet. "You little fool!" he shouted, clutching his wound. "You'd shoot me." Charlotte's voice rang clear. I already did. And the next one goes through your chest, if you try again. For a long moment, silence fell, except for the groans of the wounded. The second gunman slowly raised his hands. Ain't worth dying for, Peyton. She ain't going with you. Richard staggered back, his polished arrogance crumbling. You'll regret this, Charlotte. Both of you. I have influence, power, men who'll... Not here, Jed cut in coldly. Not in Montana. Out here, a man stands on his own. You come back, I won't aim to wound Richard's pale face, twisted with hate. But he mounted his horse, rage simmering behind his eyes. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Charlotte said firmly, because if you ever return, I'll show the world what kind of man you are. I'll write it in every newspaper from Boston to San Francisco. Try me. The gunmen helped Richard retreat down the pass. Their shapes shrank until they vanished into the snow. Jed lowered his rifle slowly, turning to Charlotte. She stood frozen, breath coming hard, hands still shaking around the weapon. He stepped closer, gently prying it from her grip. You did good, he murmured. Her lips trembled. I shot him, Jed. I actually shot him. You protected us. You protected what's ours. For a moment, her composure broke. She fell against him, sobbing into his chest. He held her tightly, his arms strong, his voice steady. It's over now. He won't be back. Days passed. Word spread through Cedar Ridge of the confrontation. Sheriff Cobb came, heard the truth from Jed and Charlotte, and swore protection. With testimony from the surviving gunman, Richard Peyton's influence weakened, his forged warrants exposed. His name carried no weight west of the Mississippi anymore. Life settled again, though not as it had been. Charlotte no longer seemed like a guest in Jed's cabin. She moved with confidence, splitting wood, cooking meals, laughing softly as she carved another clumsy figurine beside his wolves. The small space, once a prison of grief, now rang with warmth. One evening, as the sun dipped red behind the peaks, Charlotte stood in the doorway, her hair catching the firelight. Jed stepped behind her, resting his hands gently on her shoulders. You saved me, she said quietly. You saved me first, he answered. She turned, eyes glistening. What happens now? Jed swallowed, fear and longing warring inside him. I don't know. Storm will pass. I can take you to Cedar Ridge. You can catch the next stage west, San Francisco. Your aunt. A new life. Her gaze didn't waver. I've already chosen my new life. It's here. With you. His throat tightened. He searched her face, looking for doubt, but found only truth. Charlotte, I warned you once. I can't control myself around you. Don't you understand what that means? Her smile was soft but fierce. Yes. It means you love me. And I love you. Jed's defenses crumbled. He pulled her close, kissing her with a hunger born of 15 years of silence. She clung to him, answering with all her heart. When they broke apart, breathless, Jed pressed his forehead to hers. You sure about this life? He asked. Hard winters, long days, no city comforts. I'm sure, she whispered, because it's ours. That night, for the first time in years, Jed lay beside a woman, not as a broken man clutching memories, but as a man reborn. They fell asleep, wrapped in each other, the fire crackling low, the wolves on the mantel watching over them like guardians. Months later, when the mountains bloomed with spring flowers, Charlotte walked hand in hand with Jed down to the meadow. Thunder grazed nearby, and in her other hand she carried a wooden wolf she had finally carved with her own skill. Not bad, Jed teased. Not perfect, she admitted, but neither are we. And that's what makes it beautiful. Jed pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. For the first time in 15 years, he smiled freely. The hermit of Wolverine Peak was no longer alone. Together, they had faced storms, gunfire, and ghosts of the past, and together they would build a life, wild and hard, but real. Because sometimes, love isn't found in ballrooms or contracts. Sometimes it's found in the snow, in the firelight of a cabin, in the arms of the one person who makes survival feel like living again.